Washington. Winter, 2021. The chill in the air bit at his skin, and the streets glistened with the leftovers of an early snowfall, but none of it registered for Richard. His mind raced in overdrive, and everything around him seemed to blur muted and distant. He had flown in from Seattle, with hopes of surprising Emma, a quiet anniversary dinner, a chance to heal the rift that had been growing between them. But something had been gnawing at him for months now, a quiet susp that only got louder as time passed. Emma, his wife, for 12 years, hadn't been herself lately. At first he dismissed it as work, dress, long hours, tight deadlines, the usual grind, but then there were the little things, the way she seemed distracted whenever his name came up, the late nights at the office, the whispered phone calls she always took when he wasn't around. Richard tried to ignore the thoughts creeping in, telling himself he was just being paranoid. They'd been through so much together, their marriage had survived so many storms, but lately he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The tipping point came when Emma casually mentioned how she and David, the new guy at work, had started collaborating on projects. Her tone was light, almost too casual, but inside Richard's stomach shed. Why did she have to bring him up? Why was she so eager to talk about this new work partnership, this man who until now had been a mere name in their lives? David is a good guy, she had said, her smile bright but her eyes avoiding his. We're working late this week to get the presentation ready for that big client. It's been a grind. Richard didn't respond, but something shifted inside him. He couldn't pinpoint why, but he had a gut feeling that there was more to this partnership than she was letting on. That evening, as he sat in the back of a taxi, heading to the hotel where Emma was staying, his thoughts were racing even faster. He'd already checked in, changed into a fresh shirt, and now, with the evening stretching ahead, he was determined to make things right. A surprise dinner, a chance to reconnect, a reminder of what they were before everything started slipping away. But as the cab wove through the streets, doubt lingered. Richard could still work. Is it too late for them, his mind asked. But before he could dwell too much, the driver's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. You look like you're on a mission, my friend. Big night. Richard gave a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Something like that. As the cab neared Emma's hotel, he glanced at his watch. 4:40 p.m. Perfect timing. He had just enough time to surprise her, to make the night feel special. He asked the driver to wait while he went inside to check on her. His nerves were on edge, but he pushed them aside. This had to work. Tonight had to be the night. Everything changed inside the hotel lobby. The receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. Richard did his best to sound casual, though his voice betrayed a hint of impatience. I'm Richard Jones. I was hoping to surprise my wife, Emma Jones. Could he check if she's in her room? The receptionist glanced down at her records, nodding. Of course, Mr. Jones, one moment please. Richard's heart raced as he stood there scanning the lobby, trying to calm the storm inside his chest. He was so close now, just a little longer. A moment later, the receptionist looked back at him, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry, sir, but there's no answer in her room. Would you like to leave a message? Disappointment washed over him, but he managed a forced smile. Not right now. I was hoping to surprise her. He leaned in slightly. Tomorrow is our anniversary. I want to make it special. The receptionist smiled warmly. Of course, Mr. Jones. I hope everything works out for you. After thanking her, Richard stepped back into the lobby, a strange weight settling on his chest. He glanced at his watch again. It was 6 p.m. The night wasn't unfolding the way he had hoped. He stepped outside into the brisk winter air, the city buzzing around him. It felt so surreal. Everything seemed normal, alive, while his heart was sinking lower with every passing second. He had hoped this night would mark the beginning of something fresh, but now he wasn't so sure. Still, he pushed forward. The walk to the restaurant wasn't far, just a few blocks, but Richard's mind felt a million miles away. He replayed every detail of his earlier conversation with Emma. Her words, her smile, the way she had looked, or more precisely, the way she hadn't looked at him. Something had shifted, and tonight he was determined to find out what the restaurant was. Just as he had imagined, small, tucked away, cozy and intimate. The lighting was low, the atmosphere warm. Richard took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wanted this night to be perfect. But as he stood at the entrance, doubt flickered once again. The doors swung open, and he stepped inside, a sudden unease creeping over him. He had no idea what he was about to find. The restaurant was filled with quiet laughter, the soft murmur of couples leaning into each other, sharing private moments in the dim glow of candlelight. It was the kind of place meant for whispered conversations and stolen glances, for rekindling old flames, were celebrating new love. But for Richard, none of it mattered. The world outside was crashing in, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat pounded in his ears, growing louder with each step. He hadn't expected this, not the suffocating weight pressing down on his chest, not the way his stomach churned as if bracing for a punch he hadn't seen coming. It felt as though the very foundation of his life, his marriage, his wife, everything he thought he knew, was crumbling beneath him. His gaze swept the room, searching. Emma wasn't at the bar, nor was she near the tall windows that overlooked the city streets. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted over the intimate booths lining the back of the restaurant. And then he heard it soft, melodic, familiar, her laughter, a sound of hadn't heard in what felt like forever, a sound that had once belonged to him. His breath hitched as he followed it, his body moving before his mind could catch up with every step. The laughter grew clearer, richer, tinged with something he hadn't heard in her voice in months. Happiness, real, unfiltered happiness. He turned the corner, and there she was at first. It looked harmless. A small booth in the far corner, tucked away from the main dining area. Two people deep in conversation. But Richard's stomach twisted into a tight knot as his eyes locked onto Emma. She was leaning toward man. He didn't recognize her posture. Relaxed, comfortable, familiar. The kind of ease that only came with intimacy. Her eyes shimmered with something warm and electric. Something he hadn't seen in them when she looked at him in a long time. Then there was her hand, resting lightly on the man's forearm, her fingertips tracing small, absent-minded circles against his sleeve as they spoke. And her smile, not the polite, tight-lipped one she had given Richard over dinner the past few months, not the weary, forced grin she wore after long days at work. No, this was different. It was the kind of smile she used to give Richard when they were young before. Time and responsibility had settled between them like a heavy weight before life. His heart slammed against his ribs, his body rooted to the floor, unwilling to believe what his eyes were showing him. And then Emma did something that shattered the fragile denial holding him together. She leaned in and kissed him, not just a quick peck, not a polite brush of lips, a slow, lingering kiss. The kind that made the rest of the world fade away, the kind of kiss that whispered promises and history, that held secrets in its softness. Richard's world tilted, his breath leaving his lungs in a sharp exhale. For a moment he was frozen, trapped in a nightmare, where everyone else continued living while he stood, still suffocating under the weight of betrayal. It was real, it was happening. His Emma, his wife, kissing another man as if nothing else existed. He stumbled back a step. The walls of the restaurant suddenly closing in, the air felt thick, his vision tunneling. He needed space, he needed air, he needed to wake up from whatever cruel joke the universe was playing on him. Somehow his legs carried him toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, nails biting into his palms as he tried to hold himself together. The sting of betrayal burned like acid in his chest, spreading with every beat of his racing heart. Inside the restroom he gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles turning white as he stared at himself in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes wide, shock, disbelief, devastation, all swirling in the reflection of a man who no longer recognized his own life. What happened to us? Where did she go? Where did I lose her? His breathing came in shallow bursts as he forced himself to straighten, dragging a hand through his hair. He couldn't fall apart here. Not now. He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat refusing to go away after a long, slow breath. He stepped back out into the hallway, and then something shifted. The raw shock that had paralyzed him melted into something harder, something sharper, rage. This wasn't just something he could walk away from. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, that the distance between them was temporary, that she wasn't slipping further and further away. Richard had come here tonight to save their marriage. But Emma, she had already moved on. His steps were measured, deliberate, as he made his way back toward the dining area. His heart pounded, but his mind was set. He wasn't going to make a scene, not yet, but he wouldn't let her get away with this either. When he reached the booth again, they were still there, still laughing, still lost in each other. She hadn't noticed him. She hadn't even considered that he could be here in the same city, breathing the same air, while she sat inches from another man looking at him like he was her whole world. The weight of it crushed him. He stood there for a long moment, watching the anger and hurt twisting together into something unbearable. And then he spoke. Emma. His voice was tight, strained, barely more than a whisper, but she heard it. Her laughter died instantly. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening, not just in surprise but something else, guilt. She masked it quickly, her expression shifting into one of confusion. "Richard," she asked, voice faltering. What are you doing here?" The man beside her turned slightly, his brows furrowing, irritation flashing across his face. But Emma's attention was now entirely on Richard, and for the first time tonight she hesitated. She opened her mouth, searching for words. But Richard didn't let her find them. "What the hell is this, Emma?" His voice trembled, thick with emotion. The weight of everything crashing down on him at once. "What's going on here?" Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her cheeks flushing. The man beside her placed a hand on her arm, an instinctive, possessive gesture meant to steady her. It made Richard's blood boil. He turned his gaze on the man, eyes cold, jaw tight. "This is between me and her." His tone was clipped. "Dangerous. Stay out of it." The man hesitated, his grip loosening on Emma's arm, and then before Emma could even form a response, Richard cut her off. "I saw you." His voice was quieter now, but it carried enough weight to make her shoulders stiffen. "I saw you two in the lobby laughing, kissing, celebrating your little 2-month anniversary." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. "Is this really how you want it to end?" Richard's voice came out low, strained, but edged with something raw, something final. He stood there staring at Emma, his pulse hammering, his entire world crashing down around him, with me standing here watching you with him. The restaurant felt silent. Or maybe it was just his own ears ringing from the weight of it all. Without breaking his gaze, he reached for his wedding ring, the small silver band that had once meant forever. He slipped it off his finger, holding it in his palm for just a moment longer than necessary. Then with a flick of his wrist he tossed it onto the table. The tiny piece of metal clattered against the polished surface, spinning once, before coming to a halt in front of Emma. Her face drained of color. She parted her lips, as if to say something, but no words came for a moment. Everything seemed to slow. The weight of all the things left unsaid filled the space between them. Years of love, of promises, of fights and reconciliations. Everything that had once held them together was now unraveling thread by thread in a dimly lit corner of a restaurant neither of them belonged in. And then the man beside Emma spoke. His voice was low, annoyed, laced with entitlement. Maybe you should leave. His eyes narrowed slightly as he shifted in his seat. This isn't your business. Richard let out a bitter laugh, one that carried no humor. He turned to him slowly, his expression unreadable but his voice ice cold. Oh, trust me, it's my business. The tension crackled between them, thick and suffocating. Emma finally found her voice, though it was weak, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. I didn't. This isn't what it looks like. She stumbled over the words, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard narrowed his eyes. Save it, Emma. His tone was like steel, cutting through whatever excuse she was about to fabricate. I'm done. I can't keep living this lie. There was nothing else to say. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out of the restaurant. His chest felt tight, his breathing ragged, but he didn't stop. He didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind him, the finality of it echoing in his mind, reverberating through every step he took. Cold air hit him like a slap, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain clawing at his chest. He had seen it, heard it, and it hit harder than anything he had ever imagined. He didn't know how long he wandered through the city. His streets. Time felt meaningless. The neon lights of storefronts blurred past him, the distant hum of traffic nothing more than a dull roar in his ears. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of it all. 2 months, the words played on a loop in his head, over and over, taunting him like some cruel joke. For 2 months, Emma had been with another man while he had been at home, waiting, trusting, holding on to the hope that things would get better, that she would come back to him. She had been out there laughing, kissing, building something new. The realization slammed into him like a freight train, and yet beneath the rage, beneath the betrayal that seared through his veins, there was something else, something deeper, a sadness so heavy it nearly brought him to his knees. For all the years they had shared, for all the love they had once had. How had he missed it? What had she started slipping away? And why hadn't he seen it sooner? By the time he reached the hotel, his feet ached, but his heart ached more. He stood outside the entrance for a long moment, staring at the glowing sign above the door, feeling lost in a way he never had before. He didn't know what came next. No plan, no direction. Just a hollow emptiness sitting in the pit of his stomach. But one thing was clear, he couldn't face her again. Not tonight. He had to process it, the betrayal, the grief, the finality of it all. Stepping inside, he barely registered the buzz of conversation in the lobby. The receptionist at the front desk offered him a polite smile, but he didn't acknowledge it. He felt like a ghost, drifting through the space, detached from everything around him. The elevator ride to his room stretched on endlessly. When the doors finally slid open, he stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. But the room felt foreign now. What had once been a place of comfort, a space meant for the two of them, now felt cold and empty. The walls seemed to press in on him, suffocating in their silence. He shrugged off his coat and tossed it onto the bed, pacing the length of the room, his fingers raped through his hair. His mind replaying the moment over and over, her face, the way her eyes had widened when she saw him, the way color had drained from her cheeks, that flicker of guilt she had been so quick to mask. But it wasn't just that, it was the kiss, the way she had leaned into him, the way it had felt effortless, natural, second nature to her, the love, the warmth, the intimacy. Maybe Emma would try to spin it into something it wasn't. Maybe she'd reach for excuses the way she always had whenever her behavior came into question. But this time Richard needed to say it out loud. He needed to hear himself admit the truth to someone who had been there from the very beginning. By noon he found himself standing outside Linda's house. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of winter chill that settled deep in the bones, matching the heaviness in Richard's chest. He hesitated at the doorstep, his breath clouding in the frigid air as he tried to steady himself. He wasn't ready to face Emma, not yet, but Linda. He couldn't avoid her, the thought of her disappointment. Her disbelief, it weighed on him more than he cared to admit, but he had to do this just as he raised a fist to knock. The door creaked open. Linda stood there, looking older than he remembered. The lines on her face seemed deeper. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of something unspoken. Her eyes were red, swollen as if she'd spent the night crying. A pang of guilt shot through Richard's chest. He hadn't meant to drag her into this mess, Hadn't wanted to be the one to break her heart too, but it was too late for that. "Now, Richard," she said, her voice softer than he expected. "I didn't think you'd come, not after laugh last night." Richard swallowed hard. "I had to." His voice was tight, controlled. "I can't leave things like this, Linda. You deserve to know the truth." She held his gaze for a moment, before stepping aside, wordlessly inviting him in. The house smelled of old wood and lavender, a scent that had always reminded him of Sunday dinners, of family gatherings, of the time when he and Emma were still something worth believing in. But now, instead of warmth, the familiarity only deepened the ache in his chest. He followed Linda into the living room, his steps slow and deliberate. The space hadn't changed. The same worn-out armchair sat near the fireplace, the same framed photos lined the mantel, capturing years of birthdays, vacations, holidays, that now felt like relics of another lifetime. Richard sank onto the couch, but Linda remained standing, arms crossed over her chest, like she was bracing herself. It was confusion in her eyes, concern, but there was something else too. Something that looked an awful lot like guilt. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally Richard broke the silence. "I saw them together, Linda," he said, his voice rough, the words heavy. "I saw Emma in him. David, at a restaurant last night." He forced himself to say it. They were celebrating their anniversary. The color drained from Linda's face. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. First, when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard, you're mistaken." The words hit him like a slap. "Emma would never." Richard let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "No," he cut in his tone, harsher than he intended. "I'm not mistaken." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. I saw them kissing, holding hands. I watched them celebrate." Linda's eyes shimmered with tears, but she quickly turned her head, looking toward the window, as if she could escape his words by staring at the world outside for a brief moment. Richard thought she might walk away, shut down, refuse to hear anymore, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. Her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. When she spoke again, her voice was small. "You have to understand, Richard," she murmured. "Emma's been under so much pressure at work, and she's always been so afraid of losing you. Maybe this isn't what it looks like. Maybe it's just an emotional mistake." Richard's breath caught in his throat. An emotional mistake, that's what she thought. This was a fleeting moment of weakness. His jaw tightened, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. An emotional mistake. He repeated the words, bitter on his tongue. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "How long has it been going on, Linda? Because I've been in the dark for months, and He stopped himself, forcing his hands open, forcing the heat in his chest to settle before it exploded. Losing control wouldn't help. He needed to stay calm for his own sanity. Linda sighed heavily, her eyes distant, lost in thought she couldn't bring herself to voice. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted, her voice cracked on the last word. "I raised her, Richard. She's my daughter, and as much as I want to believe she's been faithful to you, I can't ignore what you're telling me." She hesitated. "But I'm not ready to throw everything away either, you too." Her voice wavered. "You've been together so long, you've been through so much." Richard sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. He hadn't expected Linda to accept it right away, but her denial, her refusal to face the full weight of what had happened, felt like another blow to the gut. It was like she was clinging to some hope that Emma wasn't who she had proven herself to be, that maybe this could still be salvaged, and Richard couldn't blame her for that, but it didn't make it hurt any less. His voice softened, the exhaustion settling deep in his bones. "I'm not throwing anything away, Linda." He met her gaze, searching for understanding. "I'm not throwing Emo away." He swallowed hard. "But I can't pretend this is something I can just move past. I don't know her, that kind of loyalty anymore, not after everything she's done, not after all the lies." He paused, inhaling sharply through his nose, exhaling just as hard. He shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't." Linda's tears finally spilled over. She wiped them away quickly, her shoulders trembling. "Richard, please." Her voice cracked. "I know this isn't easy, but Emma's always been afraid of losing you." She hesitated. Maybe this is her way of coping with that fear. "I don't know, but I do know one thing." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "She still loves you." Richard let out a sharp, bitter laugh, the sound empty and hollow. His voice dripped with disbelief. "If she really loved me, she wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have kept it from me for so long." His words cut through the heavy silence hanging there between them like a knife, waiting to drop. Linda flinched slightly, her lips pressing into a tight line. Her eyes, still rimmed with sorrow, searched his face, as if trying to find some piece of him that wasn't shattered. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "What are you going to do now?" Richard exhaled sharply and rose to his feet, the hesitation, the uncertainty, the endless back and forth in his head. He was done with it. He had spent enough time trying to hold on to something that was already gone. His jaw tightened. "I'm leaving." He squared his shoulders, the finality of the decision settling deep in his chest. "I'm going back to Seattle, and I'm moving on. I can't keep holding on to something that isn't there anymore." Linda didn't To argue she didn't try to change his mind or offer one last offense for Emma. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, before turning away. She walked toward the window, resting her hands on the sill as she gazed out into the cold gray afternoon. The silence stretched between them thick, with all the things that didn't need to be said, and Richard didn't feel the need to fill it. There were no more words left to exchange, no more explanations, no more justifications. He had said everything he needed to, and as he turned toward the door, he knew this was it. He wasn't coming back. The hours after leaving Linda's house unraveled in a blur of movement and less wandering. He didn't return to the hotel right away. Instead, he walked through streets overflowing with people who had no idea their world had just collapsed. Neon signs flickered in the fading daylight, cabs honked impatiently, conversations blurred together into a low hum of life, moving forward unaffected by his pain. But for Richard, everything had changed. He had severed ties with Linda, made it clear that he was done with Emma. He had set the decision in stone. So why did it still feel like he was drowning? The weight of it pressed down on him with every step, a tightness in his chest that refused to loosen. The sharp pang of guilt twisted through him, knowing that his marriage was truly over, that Emma, the woman he had built a life with, was no longer his. And she hadn't been for a long time. The city around him was indifferent. It didn't care about his heartbreak. It didn't pause for grief. Neither could he. Eventually, he found himself standing outside the hotel, staring up at the building where he had planned to surprise Emma. Just a day earlier, the irony clawed at him. He had been so certain, so sure that he could fix things. But that dream was gone. Now he stepped inside, moving on autopilot, barely acknowledging the receptionist as he made his way upstairs. By the time he reached his room, it was nearly 5. In the evening, he had just begun shrugging off his jacket when a knock at the door froze him in place. His pulse, it was too soon for Emma to show up, but then the knock came again, firmer this time. Reluctantly, he moved to the door and pulled it open. There, she was, Emma. She looked smaller than he remembered, her hair loose around her shoulders, her skin pale, her eyes swollen from what he could only assume had been hours of crying. She stood before him, like a woman unraveling, her posture slumped as if the weight of her choices was finally pressing down on her. She looked exhausted, and maybe, just maybe, she looked like she regretted everything. But Richard didn't invite her in. He didn't need to. He had already made his choice. His voice came out steady, emotionless. You came. She swallowed hard before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. I had to. We need to talk. The words hung in the air between them, thick with everything that had been left unsaid. But Richard wasn't sure there was anything left worth saying. I don't think there's anything. Talk about, Emma. His voice was calm but unyielding. I saw you and him at the restaurant celebrating your little 2-month anniversary. Emma's lips parted slightly, her eyes flickering with something, pain, guilt, maybe even shame, but she didn't look away. Instead, she took a tentative step forward. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she murmured, her voice trembling. I wasn't thinking straight. Everything just became too much. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to fix us. Richard stared at her, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Even now, even after everything, she was still making excuses. Her words rang hollow, rehearsed like she had spent the day crafting them, practicing them in a mirror, trying to convince herself that this could all be salvaged. His voice sharpened, overwhelming. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. You were overwhelmed by what? By the guilt of lying to me, by sneaking around behind my back. His voice rose slightly. How many months was I living with a stranger in my own home, Emma? How many nights did you kiss me? Good night. Tell me you love me and then go to him. How many? Emma flinched, as if the words had physically struck her, but she didn't run. She took another step. Closer, desperation creeping into her voice. I didn't mean to hurt you, Richard. I swear I didn't. He scoffed. You didn't mean to. The anger inside him surged like a tidal wave. 2 months, Emma. 2 months of sneaking around, lying, covering your tracks. His jaw clenched. That didn't just happen. That took effort. That took time. That took planning. For the first time, he saw something break in her. Her face crumpled. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. But it was too little, too late. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think I'd lose control like this. The sincerity in her voice made Richard's stomach churn for a fleeting second. A small part of him almost believed her, almost let himself feel the weight of her regret. But it wasn't enough. It couldn't be. Not when everything they had spent years building had been torn apart so carelessly. You've lost control. All right, Richard muttered under his breath, his eyes cold, his voice laced with quiet anger. You've lost everything. And you don't even seem to care. He could see her flinch, but she said nothing, because if you did, he continued, stepping forward. You would have come to me, you would have told me, but you didn't. You chose him, you chose the affair, and now you're standing here telling me it was all a mistake. His jaw clenched, his hands curling in fist at his sides. Well, I don't buy it. The words landed like a blow. Emma's expression wavered, her lips parting as if to argue, but she didn't. The weight of his words settled over her like a crushing force. And for once she had no excuse, she had nothing left to say. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I don't know what to do anymore." Her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold together the pieces of something that had already shattered. "I thought I could fix it, but I didn't know how. I still don't." Richard let out a slow breath, his anger cooling into something more resolute. Something final. His voice softened but remained firm. "You can't fix it, Emma. It's broken, and I'm not going to pretend it's not." Breath hitched, but he didn't stop. "I can't be the one who fixes this, not anymore. You made your choice and I've made mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. The finality of his words filled every empty space in the room, doctor, drowning any hope that might have remained. Emma stood there unmoving, her hands trembling at her sides, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Richard saw it, the realization settling in. She had destroyed everything. She had nothing left to fight for. He took a slow step back, his heart, heavy exhaustion weighing him down like a lead weight. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said, quieter now but no less firm. "I've said everything I need to say." His voice was laced with something almost worse than anger, finality, defeat. And Emma for once didn't argue, she didn't beg, she didn't fight him, she simply nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. The soft click of the door closing behind her sent a hollow ache through Richard's chest. He stood motionless, staring at the empty space where she had just been, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. But the one thing he knew, the only thing he was certain of, was that this was the end. It was over, and he was ready to move on. Richard stood by the window long after Emma left, staring out at the city below the apartment, once filled with warmth, with memories, with shared laughter, and quiet moments now felt colder than ever. A part of him ached to run after her, to call her back, to pretend, just for a little longer, that they could fix. But he knew better. The choice had been made. It was over. He turned away from the window, rubbing a hand over his face, trying to blink away the exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind an emptiness so deep it nearly swallowed him whole. What was left now? What was the point of holding on? Any of it? His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp ring of his phone. The sudden noise cut through the silence, startling him. He glanced at the screen. An unknown number. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. Maybe it was Emma. Maybe it was Linda. Maybe it was someone else entirely. But it didn't matter. He wasn't ready for another conversation. Not yet. Still, after a few more rings, something inside him told him to answer. He exhaled and pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello," a familiar voice, soft and distant, filled the line. "Richard, it's me, Em's mom. Linda." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, his chest tightening. He had been expecting this. Of course she would call. Of course she would try to make sense of this. Try to smooth over what couldn't be fixed. Linda, who had spent Emma's entire life excusing her faults, defending her choices, softening the truth. But Richard was done explaining himself. He wasn't going down that road again. He couldn't. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I know." A long pause stretched between them. He could hear Linda's breath hitch on the other end, as if she was struggling to find the right words. "Richard, I don't know what to do with this." Her voice trembled. "It's just so hard to accept. Check. My daughter, and I don't want to believe that she could do this to both of you." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to believe." She threw everything away. Richard swallowed, gripping the edge of the desk, until his knuckles turned white. A few days ago, he would have been furious. He would have wanted to scream at her, tell her to stop making excuses for her daughter, to open her eyes to the truth. But now, the anger wasn't as sharp. It was dull, worn down by the exhaustion, the disappointment, the inevitability of it all. His voice was low, but steady. "She made her choice. Linda," he exhaled slowly. "I'm not going to keep fighting for something that isn't there. I've been holding on to something that's been gone for months. It's time to move on." Silent. A long, heavy silence. Then Linda's voice. Barely more than a whisper. "I understand," she sniffled, clearing her throat. But the emotion was still there, thick in every word. "I just wish things hadn't turned out this way. I am sorry, Richard, I truly am." Richard closed his eyes, her words pressing down on him, but he didn't want sympathy. He didn't need it. He just wanted this to end. His voice was quiet, but firm. "It's not your fault, Linda, but I have to do this. I have to let her go, and I have to let go of the life we built together." "I know," Linda said softly. "But please don't close the door completely. She's still your family." She hesitated, her voice thick with emotion. "She's still the woman you loved." A bitter laugh escaped Richard's lips. It was quiet, empty, devoid of humor. "Family," he repeated, shaking his head. "The woman I loved." He let out of breath, glancing around the dimly lit hotel room, a space that had once held so much hope. "She's a stranger to me now, Linda. She chose him over me." He clenched his jaw, his voice hardening. "And you know what? I don't think I can ever look at her the same way again." Silence stretched between them, thick with finality, for the first time since the conversation started. Linda didn't argue. She didn't try to convince him otherwise. and that more than anything told Richard that deep down she knew he was right. The fight had left him the rage, the pain. It was still there simmering beneath the surface, but no longer had the same sharp edges. It had bled into something else, something quieter. He wasn't angry anymore, he was just exhausted, bone-deep, soul-weary, exhausted. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to give. "Well," Linda finally said, her voice laced with quiet resignation. "If you ever change your mind, you know where we are?" Richard hesitated, then nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Thank you, Linda. But this is my choice, and it's the right one." He hung up without another word. The room fell silent again, but this time it didn't feel as oppressive for the first time in days. Richard felt like he could breathe. He was done with the lies, done with the deceit, done with waiting for someone who had already moved on. The love he had for Emma was still there, buried, deep, tangled up in memories that had once meant everything. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The moment he had seen her with David, their secret laid bare in the dim glow of that restaurant, he had known it was time to walk away. The next few hours unraveled in a blur of motion. He moved quickly, methodically. There was no need for sentimentality, no time for it. He pulled open the closet, grabbed the essentials, a few shirts, a jacket, his laptop. Then his eyes landed on a picture frame, resting on the nightstand. A photograph from their honeymoon, Emma, in his arms. Both of them laughing, the ocean stretching behind them like something out of a dream. It had always been his favorite. A frozen moment in time, before reality had chipped away at them, before the quiet resentment had taken root. Now it felt like a cruel joke. Richard picked it up, stared at it for a long moment, then without hesitation he slid it into his bag, not because he wanted to keep it, but because he refused to leave anything behind. When he was done, he stood in the doorway of the hotel room, his bag slung over his shoulder. He took one last look around. It didn't feel like home. It hadn't for a while. He stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him with a quiet click, and he didn't look back. The cold air hit him like a slap as soon as he stepped onto the busy streets of Washington. The city moved on, oblivious. The hum of traffic, the distant conversations, the flickering glow of streetlights, it all continued, indifferent to the storm raging inside him. To Richard, it felt like the world had come to a standstill. He was leaving, but he had no idea where he was going. The airport was an hour away and the drive felt longer. He didn't let himself think about the future, not yet, right now. It was enough just to escape, to put as much distance between himself, the wreckage of his marriage, as he could. As the taxi sped toward the airport, Richard leaned back against the seat, his eyes fixed on the city skyline in the distance. No tears came. He had cried enough, screamed enough. The anger had faded, replaced by a hollow emptiness, a sense of finality that clung to him like a shadow. But beneath it, beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something quieter, something like peace. The airport was chaos, a blur of people, of hurried goodbyes and rushed check-ins, of voices echoing over the loudspeaker. But to Richard it all felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life unfold, not his own. He moved through the motions, without thinking. Bag checked, boarding pass printed, security cleared. Then as he settled into a seat near his gate, he pulled out his phone. A flood of unread messages waited for him. Concerned text from his parents, missed calls from friends, and one last voicemail from Emma. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Just a moment. He considered pressing play, but he couldn't. Hearing her voice would only make it harder, and he had already given her too many chances. The gate number flashed on the screen, signaling the start of boarding. Richard stood, slung his bag over his shoulder, and walked toward the line. His mind drifted again back to those final moments with Emma. How empty it had felt. How unreal, like something out of a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. When he had asked her in that quiet final moment if this was really how she wanted to end things, she had looked at him with such sadness in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. None of it was enough to undo the damage. The flight was long. Richard spent most of it staring out the window, his mind replaying the last few days over and over again. What had gone wrong? What could have been different? But no matter how much he thought about it, there was no answer, only the truth. The raw, painful truth. Emma had made her choice. And so had he. When he finally landed in Seattle, the familiar skyline did little to ease the ache in his chest. He had hoped that distance would help, that getting away would bring some kind of clarity. But the emptiness was still there, waiting for him. The house was quiet. When he walked inside, he put down his bag and looked around. The furniture, the photographs, the echoes of a life he had once shared with Emma. All of it felt like a ghost of what had been his phone bust. A text, Emma. I am sorry, I don't know what else to say. I hope one day you can forgive me. Richard stared at the message, his thumb hovered over the screen for a split second. He considered responding, yelling, pouring out everything that had been left unsaid. But then he exhaled. No message would change what had happened. The finality of it was too great. He set his phone down and walked to the kitchen, pulled out a glass. The ice clinked as it hit the bottom, the sound strangely comforting. As he poured himself a drink, he let out a slow breath. This was the beginning of something new. A chapter without Emma. One that was entirely his own, and for the first time in a long while he felt a flicker of something, not regret. Not loss. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough.